All right. Hello and welcome everyone on the Barricades. My name is Boyan Stanislavski. With me is the co-host of the show, Maria Chernat, and we welcome our special guest, Mark Sleboda. Hello, Mark. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you back on.
Boyan, Maria, thanks for having me. It is an honor and a pleasure to be back on the Barricades.
Thank you. Thank you. Likewise. So just, a short info for our viewers who have perhaps not watched the previous episodes featuring yourself, Mark, on our show. It's you are an international security analyst. You are a former professor at the Moscow State University. You are also doing quite a lot of media work, most notably the recently established YouTube channel, the Realpolitik, which I follow and I recommend everyone to follow.
Yeah, that's just a little amateur thing yet, but yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, anyway, I still recommend it. And last but not least, you were a member of the United States military.
Yes.
And you now live in Moscow.
Yes.
Right. And that makes you, a great person to talk to about the ongoing conflict on Ukraine. I'd like to get some, general updates from you. But before we sort of come to the point where we can have a more nuanced discussion about certain elements of what's been going on recently, let's just get out of the way the kind of thing that everybody's talking about. I mean, the military weight of this, because obviously I want to talk later about the ramifications that it has for the Russian public opinion, for the government, the huge, great, fantastic success of the Ukrainian military, that is the great counter-offensive in the region of Kharkov, or Kharkiv, if you want to be, politically correct these days, right? So I'd like to ask you to please tell us what is the military significance, if there is any, because, I'm not a military expert at all, by any stretch, but from what I can see, it's undoubtedly a kind of success because the Ukrainian military has taken over certain territories which were fought for weeks in the past, like a few months ago. But then, provided that the Russians have actually withdrawn from there, and in a very organized manner, as it seems, while pretending that they're actually reinforcing the region, the military itself, the Ukrainian soldiers, they just punched air there, right? Or is it like is it correct? What do you think about this take?
Yeah, that's largely correct. First of all, let me add one more personal disclosure that is important, and I always make clear to point out to everyone when discussing Ukraine. We talked about it last time, but my wife is Crimean, right? And my mother-in-law still lives. She lives in Simferopol. We spend part of the year there. And we have family all over East Ukraine, in Donbass, until recently in Kharkov, and in Odessa. So I am by far not a neutral, objective, nonpartisan observer of the conflict. I like to think that does not inflect the realism of my military analysis, but certainly my political loyalty lies with the people of East Ukraine.
Right. Thank you for this disclaimer.
Or the former.
Thank you for disclosing this, because a lot of people these days pretend they are neutral. So
yeah,
no,
I don't. Yeah, I do not at all. I wear it literally on my lapel. If you can see the Z symbol there. So again, that is perhaps somewhat of a conflict of interest, but it also gives me an insight to the point of the view of the people of East Ukraine, who have just continually been politically repressed, denied a voice in Ukrainian political affairs, repressed, literally shelled under since 2014. And their perspective is crucial, I think, to what is going on here. And they are never granted agency. They're always pro-Russian separatists or Russian-speaking East Ukrainians or something of the like. And it is usually a complete dismissal of them, their concerns, their views, their values, and so forth. So as to what, obviously there is a huge amount happening in Ukraine, and there's actually far more than most people are aware at the moment. There is a huge amount of conflict going on right now. We are in the approaching storm to probably the biggest conflict of the year.
Okay, but we're talking in military terms or in political terms?
No, in military terms. We have not reached the storm yet. It is coming in the next week or two. It is gathering right now. So basically, for the last several months, Russia had initially in the conflict had taken large territory in the south, which essentially fell without any fighting because
Kherson.
Kherson, Zaporozhye, a lot of the people there, they just changed sides. So there was very little fighting there. And the north fell under, in the Kharkov region, fell under Russia's control by April, with a mix of that and some heavy fighting in Izum. But since then, Russia on those fronts has fought static defense. They took what they wanted to. They weren't trying to take any more. Where they concentrated their forces after that initial bully rush or thunder run into the country to try to take areas quickly with a lot of intelligence work on the ground, co-opting and so forth. It worked in the south. It obviously did not work in Kiev and Chernihiv in the center of the country. They withdrew the forces from there and they concentrated back on the primary mission of the Donbass, liberating the Donbass. And the thing about the Donbass, of course, is one, the terrain. It's very tight, urban, agglomerated area, right? And number two, and with that, a lot of factories, Soviet-built factories, that if you've ever been to a Soviet-built factory, it's built like a fortress, literally, with literally, Cold War era bunkers and supplies and everything beneath them. And on top of that, for 8 years, from 2014 until February, the Kiev regime was building multiple lines of defense in multiple layers with steel and concrete fortifications, trenches, very significant. You want to call it the modern Maginot Line, right? And what we're talking about is, for instance, concrete and steel bunkers that tanks can pull out of fire to increase their range of fire, then pull back into to protect them from artillery and the like. The same things. I mean, full living quarters for troops and everything, asbestos-lined walls. It's the works. And these are built in layers and multiple lines.
So in other words, they were absolutely totally prepared for this surprising, completely unprovoked invasion.
Yeah. Oh yes, I mean everybody was everyone knew this was coming. If you listen, there is a video with one of Zelensky's principal advisors, Alexei Arestovich. Yeah, who is very much a modern Goebbels figure and is quite open about it. He's quite open that he'll tell you, I will lie to you about 80% of the time. Yeah, right. I mean, he will tell you that.
Exactly.
So he did an interview back in 2018, 2017, I believe. It's available on YouTube, where he revealed that all of this was going to happen, right? Down to the number of Russian fronts, down to the creation of republics and referendums in Kherson and Zaporozhye, everything. Everyone knew this was going to happen. This was a deliberate provocation. It was written in stone. Everyone knew it was going to happen eventually. So they definitely prepared for it. And very quietly during those 8 years, right, Ukraine built up the second most powerful army in Europe. The first most powerful, if you don't count Russia as part of Europe, which I don't. It is, just for instance, Ukraine had hundreds of tanks, right? And just recently, all of those having been destroyed, they received another 230 refurbished T-72s from Poland, far more significant than 16 American HIMARS in terms of military aid, equipment that the Kiev regime troops know how to use, know how to repair, have logistical supply lines for. But altogether, Germany and the UK have less than 200 tanks in their militaries, right? So Europe is actually very military light. They rely almost entirely on the US. And you see that even the UK and the France struggled in Libya until the US came on board a few years ago. So very significant military. And through all of that, they had NATO funding and NATO arms and NATO training for 8 years. So this was by no means going to be a bombing run, an invasion, toppling a leader in a third world country like Iraq or Libya or Afghanistan. This is a near peer competitor to Russia, something that the US, the Western militaries have not fought since World War II. So it's a very different story. And the scale of the conflict going on in Ukraine now is very reminiscent in many ways of the conflicts that were fought there in World War II, both in scale and in the nature of the conflict.
Even ideologically, to some extent, probably. Yeah.
Even there is a strong current of retread in there between the West Ukrainian Banderites and the number of Russian military units that have been flying the Soviet flag.
But in particular the militias, right? The militias, they seem to be like...
Oh, yes. The Donbass militias are very leftish orientated in general, I would say. Not all of them. There are an occasional right-wing nutter among them too. But
by and large, I'm just talking about like the kind of sentimental...
Yes, by and large. Yes, there's a lot of Soviet nostalgia, more so in the Donbass even than there is in Russia. So for the last few months, Russian and Donbass forces have been grinding through these defenses methodically, right? They set about a rhythm then. After this initial thrust and withdrawal, they went into a rhythm, and it's a brutal artillery-heavy and rocket system heavy style of conflict, where they will identify a line of defenses and they will target it for a couple of weeks. And they are dropping 50 to 60,000 artillery shells a day.
Yeah, and let us just notice here that, the Ukrainians kind of keep reinforcing their obvious failures or upcoming failures, which is also playing, which has been playing into Russia's hand. Like, this was actually, very, very strange observation for me to make, to see Ukrainian soldiers being lined up for the Russian artillery to take them out.
Yeah, and in large cases, a lot of what they have expended in the Donbass, have shoved into the fortifications there, is barely trained territorial defense, conscripts, and the like, so that they could conserve their better forces for this counteroffensive now. Like cannon fodder, right? But cannon fodder in a tight defensive line, right? It's a type of environment that heavily favors the defender. So what Russia did is they focus on this rocket system and artillery heavy. They will pound an area for a couple weeks, and they will probe it with armed reconnaissance and force. And only when they're sure that there's nothing or not much left moving will they send in the infantry. And it has to be said that in the Donbass, the majority of the ground-to-ground fighting that has been done has not been done by the Russian military.
No, by the militias, right?
It has been done by the Donbass militias, and they have suffered the highest casualties. So it is Ukrainians fighting Ukrainians, killing Ukrainians.
Which, by the way, I think, let me just throw it in here, that I think it's also the nature of what they refer to as the special military operation.
Military
right? I mean,
operation.
they were not supposed to wage a war, like according to, you know, how they explain it, but they are assisting the republics in their, you know, strive to independence, or, you know, whatever status they might in the final aftermath achieve. But that this is why that's why when people say, and I think it's a very important point, that's why I want to reiterate it, when people say the Russians have lost, the Russians have this or that, well, you know, whom are we actually talking about? Because the Russian military is only engaged to a small extent. Then we have the Luhansk militia, then we have the Donetsk militia, then we have the Wagner group, then we have the Chechens, then we have like, so it's a rather colorful, or, you know, eclectic, if you like, you know, composition, right?
Yeah.
This is
so
okay.
Yeah,
this
is
go ahead. Asking a little bit, because look, my interest in this is incidental. I'm interested in all this military talk because it's close to Romania. I'm very scared, and I feel compelled to discuss these things, which are not on my top, you know, priority and on my list of interests. And the thing that makes me and made me very anxious right from the beginning of this was the lack of factual information. And I tried to search online. I tried to find credible sources. I found a lot of, you know, discussions, Snake Island, Ghost of Kiev, and all these discussions that have nothing to do with reality in terms of what I would like to know, and I think there are a lot of viewers that would like to know just exactly how many people does Russia send, how many soldiers do they have, what kind of weaponry, what percentage of the territory have they conquered already. And you discussed, and thank you so much for pointing out that apart from the Russian military, there are also these militias. Tell us more about these people. How many do you think they are? And some factual information also on the Ukrainian side, how big is their military in terms of how many soldiers, because this is vital, and what kind of weaponry?
Good. All right, those are actually good questions, and they're really pertinent going into explaining what recently has happened with the counteroffensive. So let me just backtrack a little bit before I come to that direct on. With that, Russia has been grinding through those defenses, slowly, methodically, minimizing casualties on their side, maximizing casualties on the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainian troops complain all the time that they have no supplies, that they can't evacuate their wounded, that they have no means of fighting back, that that Russia has a 15-to-1 artillery advantage on them, that they never even see the enemy and they just die in the trenches and the fortifications. But they're still fighting for every street and every building. They're creating firing points, defenses in every single residential building, every hospital, every school, as Amnesty International's report pointed out, right? They've been doing that slowly, methodically, brutally grinding their way so that as to minimize the casualties. And why is minimizing casualties on not only among the East Ukrainians that they're trying to liberate from their perspective, and from many of the East Ukrainians' perspective, as I can attest to, because of this special military operation. I usually refer to it as an intervention because it's a term that Westerners can understand. I mean, the U.S. certainly doesn't call it an invasion when they go into Iraq or Libya or Syria. They refer to it as an intervention or some other term. No one calls anything a war anymore for international legal reasons. But in Russian terms, the terms of the special military operation actually have legal import to what can be done, what can be targeted and what cannot be targeted, and the size of the intervention. The Russian intervention from the very beginning has been limited to around 150,000 troops. That's it. Out of 1 million strong active duty military and 2 million military reserves that have not even been called up in the slightest, and they're still refused to even, the Kremlin refuses to even discuss calling up any reserves. They said it's not, we don't need to talk about that yet. I disagree with them on that strongly. In the Donbass, the Russian forces are primarily operating aviation and artillery, electronic warfare, and the like. And it's the Donbass militias, supplemented by Kadyrov's Chechen. I like to refer to them almost as a Russian warrior caste. The Chechens were actually the first ones into South Ossetia too in 2008 in the Abkhazian War, and they are very motivated, gung-ho fighters. That can be said of them. They are the ones domestically in Russia who won the Chechen Civil War. They're very practiced in warfare. And then supplemented by Wagner, which is Russia's security contractors / mercs. So that is what has been going on in the Donbass. And they've made steady incremental gains. And it has to be said, even during this counteroffensive now, that has not stopped. It is still continuing, that Donbass offensive, piece by piece, street by street, house by house, that is still going on. And the Kiev regime has been able to slow it, but never stop it. So that continues. Now, during these last months, while they're defending in the east, the Kiev regime has not been sitting twiddling their thumbs. So they have been building up their own military. The Donbass, the number of fighters there is about 40 to 50,000, right? They don't have
the militias now.
The militias, the Donbass militias on the Russian side, altogether, Lugansk and Donetsk. Lugansk has now been completely liberated, although is now being threatened again with the counteroffensive. And the Donbass is about half liberated with there's two very more important defensive lines to go through, and then it's all over. But that could well take into the beginning of next year very easily. That is it. 150,000 Russians, 40 to 50,000 Donbass militias. Those numbers stay relatively constant because they're cycled out, wounded, right? But they don't increase above the windows. Wounded, cycled out, new people brought in, but the limit, the number limit. In terms of gear, Russia, they're actually using a lot of older gear. They're using a lot, not necessarily Russia's newest military equipment, not in bulk. Now, there's a lot of evidence that Russia is testing out some things on the battlefield, but the majority of its best equipment is being kept in reserve from this fighting in case NATO intervenes directly and it becomes World War III. very, without a doubt, that is what is happening. So on the Ukrainian side, they started this, the Kiev regime side, there's Ukrainians on both sides of the conflict. The Kiev regime side, they started with a 250,000 active duty military that had purged and built up over 8 years with a lot of NATO training, funding, and weapons. You want to say
with a lot of those far-right leaders, right? Like from Azov-I.C.
Yeah, that is the Banderite militias. First of all, they had members scattered throughout the regular military, ex-members, quote unquote, which basically serve as political officers, right? They're the vanguard of the Maidan revolution. They are the ones who keep the political loyalty among the rest of the troops. No turning back, no deserting.
Yeah, exactly. They are those who are going to shoot you in the head,
in the back of the head
to go.
Yes.
Yeah, if you decide to go away, right? Yeah.
But the discrete militias still exist as well, and all total between Azov and Kraken and Aidar and Carpathy Sich and Right Sector and all of these, that's close to another 100,000. Now, and during that time, during this last few months, Ukraine has what they call mobilized the entire rest of the population, which means a lot of volunteers, particularly from West Ukraine, and everyone else is forcibly conscripted, right? Men between the ages of 16 and 60 are not allowed to leave the country.
Yeah,
They have to
that's
go
been the case
report
all
at the
along,
office.
right?
Yeah, they have to bribe their way to get out of the country. And no small number of women as well for the feminists out there. A lot of the women in specific fields have been conscripted as well. And they recently, to show you how much they are winning, they recently increased the conscription age to 70. Because that's something you do if you're winning, right? You send Dedishka and his walker out into the battlefield. Grandfather, sorry.
Yeah.
But they say now they have 1 million men under arms, men and women.
Which I've heard for. I mean, this has been their talking point for like a month or a month and a half.
Let's be honest, that isn't a propaganda exaggeration, but still they probably have, when you count in the National Guard and the police and the militias, you're probably talking a good 600 to 700,000. Yeah, maybe on the lower end of that, but yeah.
Yeah, but even 500,000, that's a massive army.
That's massive, right? Especially when the Russian and allied Donbass force is 200,000, right?
Yeah.
When you're attacking, you're actually supposed to have a 3-to-1 advantage by military logic. And it's the opposite throughout this entire conflict so far, that the Russian and Donbass forces have been fighting at least three times their number on the other side. So obviously, the strategy of just defending the Donbass and throwing forces into the meat grinder was not working for Kiev. Russia could do that forever and win, right? Meeting the Russians head on there. So a strategy was planned and war-gamed by the Pentagon, and they're quite clear about that. It's been talked about now in the Washington Post, the New York Times.
Yeah, most notably in the New York Times, the recent article, which basically, I mean, they kind of said that it was, they openly stated that the thing around Kherson was a NATO operation.
Yeah, this is a proxy conflict, right? It has NATO funding for the government, NATO funding for the military, NATO training, NATO weapons, NATO intelligence, NATO, and again, from the Washington Post, CIA and EU commandos on the ground directing the troops in the combat, NATO combat pads that the Ukrainian troops put information into, and they receive orders on where to hit and how to hit it. Direct feeds from Western satellite data and everything. It is the only difference between a full-on Russian NATO conflict at this point is that it's the Ukrainians who are doing the majority of the dying on both sides.
I mean, this is a great question. I heard someone asking it. I'm not sure who was it. Like some of the kind of some of the people that are pretty known for commenting on this conflict. Like I don't remember whether it was Douglas McGregor or Scott Reeder or someone else, but they've asked the question whether this is really a Ukrainian army. I mean, it looks like a NATO army just manned with Ukrainians.
It is.
Let us not go there, because I'm afraid this is going to take us and amplify things. Let us assume that
we'll get there. We'll get there. Don't worry.
Thanks. That sounds very.
That sounds encouraging.
Well, I never expected anything especially optimistic from you about this conflict. But what you're telling us now is like, okay. Anyway, please continue.
Just call me Mark Cassandra Sleboda, right?
Okay. Right.
So the strategy that they hit upon is, how to defeat the Russian battalion tactical group. That's the standard Russian military formation, right? Which is manpower light, but fires heavy, meaning it has its own discrete artillery, rocket systems, tanks, mechanized infantry, electronic warfare, air defenses. It's a tightly contained, gear heavy group, but it is light on basic infantry and is usually supplemented with local militias, right, as a screening force. So how to defeat that? So the strategy, when Kiev has lots of relatively untrained men under arms, mismatched NATO equipment that they can't even repair in the battlefield. They have to send it all the way back to Europe to be repaired. The entire first Ukrainian army has essentially been destroyed. it's gone. It effectively does not exist anymore. Now we're now on the second, the third, the fourth wave of mobilization. So the new Ukrainian military only vaguely resembles the first one. It is a new military. It is assembled on the fly. It has hodgepodge of equipment from different NATO countries with no clear logistical supply lines for parts, no ability to do repairs, minimal training on it, but very significant numbers, right? So the strategy they hit upon is not to try to take Russia head on in the Donbass against the BTGs straight on, but to attack either simultaneously or in quick succession in multiple axes across broad fronts with quick rushes of first diversion reconnaissance groups and then mechanized infantry, only then followed by what they have as an armored fist, Polish tanks and infantry fighting vehicles that they have quite large numbers of now, because they're facing a very heavy artillery rocket system advantage still on the Russian side, and Russia still has nearly complete air superiority, right? So, but attack everywhere at once to exhaust Russian fires, the artillery, the aviation, so that it has to pivot everywhere or move everywhere to try to put out all of these fires, all of these on-rushing, quick-coming troops, and simply to use Russia's own special military operation limitation on the number of troops available to Ukraine's advantage.
So one way or another, what the Ukrainians are trying to do with this is to escalate it on the Russian side. Because I mean, the Russians can escalate it quick, I suppose.
They can, or there is the hope that they will just drop out you have to, what are the reasons why Russia has limited this to the special military operation? And some people like to say that it is for domestic political reasons, right? Even US polling has confirmed that the support for the special military operation in Russia is in the 80%, right? It's in the high 80s. So very broad support, very big rally around the flag effect, 5-6 months into the conflict. So I'm not really buying that. And I will tell you, especially after the last week, there is a big hawkish sentiment, not only among the political elites in the country, but among ordinary people, that it's time to take the kids' gloves off, stop fooling around, and recognize that this is a total war against NATO. And the Kremlin continues to resist that. So the other possible reason, if it is not domestic political reasons, is a signal to NATO, a signal that Russia's intentions really are, or at least were, limited, right, in terms of what they're doing in Ukraine, and that they do not intend to go any further, right? I think that was obvious from the beginning, or from anyone with a brain, that this is all about Ukraine. And what has happened there since 2014. And also to try to, by doing that, to try to stop NATO from directly sending an incursion into Western Ukraine, which, if not NATO as a whole, is still very much a possibility when we consider Poland and the US separately from acting on their own, separately from the rest of NATO. It's a very distinct possibility if things go south for Kiev. They're not going south at the moment. It's really now we are in a very uneasy, very rapidly changing stalemate. So the strategy, attacking multiple axes, broad fronts, with what is essential quick-moving human waves. In the south, it didn't work. Right? In the south, it's flat, open steppe, punctuated by a few difficult river crossings like the Ingulets, that the Kiev regime forces had to move across to try to attack Kherson. There, the Russians had erected defenses, they had their trenches, they had their own fortifications built up over the last couple of months. They had massed artillery and rocket systems and aviation reserves available to them in theater. And Kiev's offensive there ground to a halt within a few days. They made a few token one-street hamlets that you have to blow up the map several times to see what is considered gains from this, right? It's literally a couple of one-street hamlets with a few dozen houses. And the casualties have been horrific, as reported by the Washington Post. And I think when we're talking wounded, and killed in action in the Kherson offensive from when it started a few weeks ago till now, it's probably 20 to 30,000 that Kiev has lost. The fault of the
3-4 brigades, I suppose, right?
Yes, absolutely. And the problem with this strategy is you have to be willing to expend large numbers of your infantry flying into the face, trying to get underneath Russian artillery and aviation just into the meat grinder. But Kiev is perfectly willing to do that, right? They've demonstrated that. So the hospitals, the morgues in Nikolaev, in Odessa, in Kryvyi Rog are full, right? I mean, all kinds of reports, have been, constantly.
Yeah, there are some horrific reports on various Telegram channels. You can see it's just absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, what's happening from this kind of, humanitarian standpoint. Yeah.
But last Friday, the second counteroffensive wave hit off, while the first one has slowed down but is still continuing. Right, Zelensky is still feeding territorial defense into that meat grinder there to keep those forces held so that they can't withdraw the fires, right? The heavy artillery, the aviation to other areas. So there's a counteroffensive in the north, and we've all seen the results of that, right? All of Kharkov, Russia has withdrawn from. But here's the key. Russia withdrew from there. They saw this counteroffensive coming. They also saw the next counteroffensive in the southeast, which is now brewing.
You're talking about Ugledar, this
yes,
region?
the two directions. One towards Ugledar and Mariupol, and the other in the south, just more formally, the south and southeast there into Zaporozhye.
Yeah, and I wonder what are they hoping for there, because there is Russian military there.
There is Russian military there, but they see that strategically as their most important in taking Mariupol and in pinning this force in the south from both sides and driving.
Yeah, okay, but Mark, I mean, let's be realistic here. Mariupol is such a, I don't know how to say it, iconic victory for Russia in this conflict that I just can't quite even imagine, what would the Ukrainian or the NATO/Ukrainian forces have to do in order to recapture Mariupol, and what kind of defeat, kind of sense of defeat it would send throughout Russia. Like, do you think it's even a perspective that it could happen?
I think that they could push this enough under optimistic scenarios to not only take Mariupol, but to take Donetsk City and end it.
And where does it come? Where does this feeling come from? I mean, I wonder,
because of the successes they had in Kharkov, and because of the amount of forces that they have amassed on the battlefield opposite Russian forces.
Yeah, but opposite Russian forces is like 30,000-40,000 people again. I mean, we're talking about, again, 3-4 brigades, which are split now because part of them went to chase the Russians that were withdrawing around Kharkov. And then we've got like another, I don't know, 15, maybe 20,000 people, there in the direction of Ugledar, which,
I think that the numbers there are actually increased that by about 3 times.
Okay. So we're talking about 45,000 people now attacking.
Maybe 50,000.
Maybe 50,000 attacking in the direction of Ugledar.
Yes.
Okay.
It's very significant. There's a very significant armored fist built up there as well. So Russia saw all of this coming. They recognized that they do not have the manpower to defend the Kherson and Kharkov and Mariupol, the southern part of Donetsk and Zaporozhye all at the same time. They don't have enough manpower to do it. So they made the decision to prioritize and abandon Kharkov. And very quietly, just a week before the offensive kicked off in Kharkov, they started withdrawing their own forces while trying to make it look like they were actually reinforcing there.
Yeah.
Because a big part of the strategy for Kiev in Kharkov seems to have been they did not expect to get what they did, and that has actually tied up forces for them. They expected to actually tie up Russian reserves in the north, while they then punched through the south into Mariupol and Zaporozhye. That's what they expected. Russia saw that, made the calculation, and made the cold-blooded decision to abandon Kharkov. And all of the people there over the last few months, the largely Russian-speaking East Ukrainian people who have collaborated with the Russians are now facing the wrath of Kraken the State Bureau investigations, who publicly announced the cleansing, the route for collaborators, and that announced publicly on their own social media, the reckoning has come. Very, very, very nice, friendly, liberal, democratic words there, right? And we've already seen the results of the beginning of the purges and the executions. And you have to remember that by the Kiev regime's legal definitions of the new draconian laws they have put into effect, anyone who even accepts humanitarian aid from Russia, food or water, and the UN tells us that there's some 16 million Ukrainians who need humanitarian aid, is a collaborator. That's their new rules. The best you can hope for is 15 years in prison, and we all know that very few people are going to go through the judicial process. We're talking about a country that, as punishment, now ties people up with duct tape around trees, right? And beats them in the public square, right? There is no judicial process anymore. There's guns in the back of the head and populist and Nazi village justice. And the Telegram channels have already been full out with messages saying, report any of your neighbors who collaborated over the last few months. So Russia left only a few standby forces in Kharkov. To hold the lights on and to conduct a last-minute way too hurried evacuations of the civilian population. And there were huge convoys of cars of people fleeing for their lives into Russia in the Belgorod region, or
it's those that the West tells us that they are being forcefully deported to Russia.
Yes. Yeah, well, I mean, particularly in the last few days, yes, that they are referred to as forcibly deported, right? They're fleeing their lives. But undoubtedly, most people probably couldn't make it, or, didn't get out in time. So that is the cost. That is the high blood cost. And that is what a lot of Russians are really upset about. And that there will be a political price for this, because now you see that the referendums have been canceled in Zaporozhye.
Those that were announced for the 5th of November?
Yes, they're canceled.
Oh, I wasn't aware that they were canceled.
How can you tell the people there now, you can trust us, we are not going to leave?
Yeah, exactly.
Because the biggest fear that prevents people, right? Another thing is a Russian passport. That's an automatic death sentence, right? For people taking Russian passports. How do you tell people vote for rejoining Russia when Kiev has made it clear that they're going to kill anyone who votes for Russia, right? They literally said that is a treasonous capital crime. So now Russia abandoned the people in Kharkov when it was strategically necessary because of Russia's own self-limitations on the special military operation. So how do you tell that to the people in Mariupol, that they're not going to be next? That Azov is not going to be back in Mariupol in 2 months, which is, let's frank it, at this point, it's a possibility.
You really think it is a possibility?
It is up in the air. It is up in the air. This coming battle in the southeast. So Russia pulled their troops out of there. They did not tie up their reserves in the north. So they pulled the reserves and the troops that were there, and everyone on both sides is now rushing forces as fast as they can to the south and southeast. Trains on both sides. It is a logistical race. It's happening right now. It's been happening for the last few days. It's happening right now as we speak, to amass the forces there for what will be almost assuredly the biggest, most decisive battle of the year. All right, before we move into the winter months when things slow down. It's going to be big, right? I'm not sure whether the main thrust is yet going to be towards Mariupol or towards Zaporozhye, but there will be two thrusts. And right now, Ukraine is basically, the Kiev regime is attacking the entire length of the Russian front. And their goal here is to immobilize Russian fires and reserves so that they can't move around and play whack-a-mole as the Ukrainian troops come in large numbers against thinly manned Russian defensive lines. And it is a strategy that certainly played to Ukraine's advantage in Kharkov, although there was very little fighting, right? There was just a few brief holding actions, and Russia withdrew in good order. But they withdrew for this specific reason. And right now, it is not clear to me, and to a lot of Russian military analysts, what the outcome of this upcoming big battle in the south and southeast will be, but it's going to determine what's going to happen next year. Yeah. It's going to be big.
Yeah, okay, I get this, but also I'm thinking between now and when this battle breaks out, I think certain things also could actually happen. There's a lot of talk, for example, and this is what I read in the Russian media that I can access, after VPN and stuff like that, is that, first of all, there's a lot of criticism, which is a new sort of, I mean, for me, at least as an outside observer, I can see a shift from what it's been like before this counteroffensive and withdrawal, and what's happening after. The way the discourse has changed in the media, and the way people, what they post and how they post and what kind of comments they make in the social media sphere and so on and so forth. It seems like there's what you spoke about briefly about this growing aggravation with the whole thing not being finished off, and with not even having the prospect of this being finished off in some kind of foreseeable future. So there's obviously a growing sort of agitation on the part of the Russian public opinion. I'm wondering whether this is going to translate into some sort of political action. And I've seen many people who are kind of known for commenting on this war, saying that what's probably now going to happen is they're going to upgrade it, like legally speaking, formally speaking, from special military operation to an anti-terrorist operation, and that they're probably going to use the kind of Zaporozhye power plant issue to sort of as a pretext for that, which is probably going to be a good pretext, provided that this is like terrorist activity, really. I mean, threatening the civilian population of entire regions of Europe, basically, with a nuclear incident, right? So I wonder whether you share those ideas, like that this sort of upgrade is about to happen, and consequently or subsequently Russia will be able to deploy more infantry. Because from what I gathered from everything you said, I understand that the bottom line here, the weakness of the Russian side, so to say, is that they don't have enough infantry to cover such a large territory.
When they're only using 10% of their own military, they're at a manpower disadvantage by their own self-limitations, right? This is the most infuriating thing. There were just giant military exercises in the Far East, the Vostok exercises with China and India and everything, with some 80,000 active duty troops there.
Exactly.
Right?
And people are asking this question. People are asking this question. Wouldn't those troops do a better job, being deployed in Ukraine rather than in Vladivostok or Magadan, right?
Yes. So that's exactly what they're saying, right? And it's obvious that you've been reading the Russian, critique there. Now, the political, I don't want to call it unrest, the political discontent in Russia. You have to understand, it's not a pro-liberal Western anti-war critique, right? It is a critique, hawkish, conservative, or leftist, right? That we have to do more, that we are in a total war with NATO at this point, and it's time to recognize that in legal terms. Let us finish this, right? That is the term. We're using 10% of our potential, less than 10%.
Maybe, yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah, 10% only in terms of the active duty military. We need to mobilize, if not all of society, which I think myself is unnecessary. We need to call up even a third of the reserves would allow Russia to, and a diversion of a certain percentage of the rest of the active duty, would allow Russia to deal with this, but they're not. And it's infuriating to a lot of people. And it's not, let's overthrow Putin, but it's let's put pressure on Putin to do the right thing here. This is the sentiment that's building now. But don't think that Russia is defeated on their heels or doubting, right? It's the opposite. I think in many ways the Kremlin is trying to put the brakes on the rest of Russia at this point for whatever bizarre political calculus they have worked out. And they don't talk about this is a war against, Russia has never talked it's a war against Ukraine, because there are Ukrainians on both sides of this conflict, something the West refuses to ever recognize, right? But that Russia intervened in an ongoing 8-year civil conflict in Ukraine. But this is not a war even anymore against the Kiev regime, or Banderistan, as I like to call it. It is a war against NATO, and the Russian people want it to be a total war. And no one really, I have not heard specifically, there's not any clear cut. If this is upgraded from a special military operation in Russian legal parlance to a counterterrorism operation, what exactly does that entail? It's not, it will have to be defined when it's declared. There's no clear indication. But remember that Russia's second Chechen war was a counterterrorism operation. And again, that conflict was, again, mostly Chechens against Chechens, but, Russia went into Grozny pretty heavy before they rebuilt it. And Grozny today is a beautiful, shining, wonderful city, actually. I strongly recommend that anyone visit it. It's very beautiful. But before that, it was destroyed. In the same type of fighting that is now happening in East Ukraine. So, that is the sentiment in Russia. And Russia is not defeated. They are not exhausted. They are not beat down. But there is every possibility that they will lose in more locations with this huge,
if they don't untie their hands.
Attacks. Yes, yeah, because they've tied their own hands. But when they do that, I do not believe there's the sentiment in the country. Putin would pay a political price if he then backed down, right? He would pay a stiff political price then. But he will certainly have the political capital to expend to expand it, right? And I do think that is happening now. The only question is, what will the expansion exactly?
Well, it seems like if you allow that, there is actually an ongoing discussion, and I always my kind of detection of an ongoing discussion within the Russian authorities, establishment, within the decision-making class, is that when there's suddenly silence from the side of the politicians, when they stop giving interviews, those, and this is what's been going on for the last few days. Like, it's like, you only hear, voices of vox populi, like people are angry, people are, aggravated about this or that. And then, I'm just waiting for something to happen. That's why I was basically, asking you this question. What do you think that they are?
I think a big part of the Kremlin's logic is they think that General Winter is going to finish Europe and finish this conflict. They think that by the end of the winter, that Europe is going to have huge political instability, that multiple governments are going to fall by sometime early next year, and that Europe will seek terms, and even if the U.S. does not. And that's I think they're counting on winning the economic side of this conflict without the necessity of a huge military escalation. That I think that is part of their calculation. Whether they're right or not, certainly I think things are going to get tough in Europe. You can
General winter and Marshall inflation.
Yeah.
I think.
I mean,
those
not
two
just
are,
that, but the entire deindustrialization of the German economy, right? When you've got all of the steel factories in that, and a lot of industries that are now, basically almost shut are suspended and are going into shutdown because they can't pay the energy costs. These are not industries that you can just shut down. They need
only Habeck
operation.
thinks that. Only Habeck thinks that they can be shut down and turned off.
If they're shut down, that's it. They're dead. They have to be completely rebuilt because of the equipment that's involved. You can't shut this equipment down. It constantly has to run. So you're looking at the complete deindustrialization of the German economy. And there are some people that say, with a conspiratorial mind, that that's actually the U.S. intention behind the geopolitical intention behind this whole thing. But I think personally that's taking it a bit too far. But it is something that might play to their advantage in a very long-term scenario. So that's where we stand now. I think that the Kremlin thinks that they're going to win this. Primarily
let's assume that this is correct. This thinking is correct. So we're going to have, if it happens, Europe's going to fall economically, socially, all kinds of, breakdowns are going to occur. And then they are going to pressure Zelensky or whomever is there, whomever will be there at that time, into some sort of deal, peace deal, whatever, temporary peace deal. And there's going to be a ceasefire. Okay. Let's assume, according to this logic, sometime next year, maybe late winter, early spring, something like that. But then the conflict keeps being frozen, right? I mean, I don't see.
Oh yeah, that's the best
solution.
You can hope.
So then, like a year later, we're just gonna have, we're gonna have another wave of that war if this happens.
Yeah, I mean, I do not believe personally.
So it doesn't seem like. Sorry, just to finish my thought. It doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like the Kremlin has it really thought out to the end, in the sense like how to finish it off, once and for good, in order to get rid of this mess right at our doorstep.
If you'll remember the interview I gave you guys at the start of this conflict, I told you that unless the decapitation strike worked in Kiev in the beginning, which they tried and did not work, then it was going to be a long conflict, that it was going to be a forever war that would permanently destabilize Europe. Right, Eastern Europe anyway. And yes, even if some type of settlement is temporarily reached with a ceasefire, with a frozen conflict, it will be even less secure than it will be just a repeat of the Minsk Accords. And we all saw that the West cannot be trusted with the Minsk Accords because they openly admitted, both Merkel and Poroshenko, that it was just to build up the Ukrainian military for 8 years. Which is, why Russia is having such problems now. So I don't believe that any peace settlement is possible. I mean, it has been spoken by Lavrov and by Medvedev now openly that the Russian goal will probably have to be regime change in Kiev, right? West Ukraine's another matter.
Especially Medvedev. Medvedev is like, he's on fire. He's been on fire.
Oh yeah, he has gone from a Westernophile into the most hawkish. I think I wonder how much of it is genuine and how much of it is rebranding him.
Because he's obviously being prepared for the for the next person after Putin. I mean, this is at least my feeling here.
It's certainly being floated. It's certainly being floated. And I, for one, I always hated Medvedev as a neoliberal and a Westernophile before, and I like what he's saying now, but I also don't trust him. After Libya, I will never trust Medvedev after he fed Libya to the West. Right.
Dogs. Okay. So let's talk just to finish this military kind of aspect of our discussion here. Let's tell me a few words about Belarus and how do you, because many people say that Belarus is is this part of well, it's not part of the conflict, obviously, but Lukashenko is now.
It is, but it isn't.
Yeah, it is, but exactly. Yeah, thank you. It is, but it isn't, in a sense that many people in Poland, for example, especially those anti-Russian analysts here, which we've got plenty of. They say that maybe the West should focus a little bit on Belarus, because Belarus is this weak point in the entire structure, and Belarus is also not so keen, I mean, especially Lukashenko and probably his generals, to take part actively in this conflict in any manner. And I wonder whether you think that Belarus plays any role or could play any role in the in the Western NATO calculations within this conflict, whether you think they could try and maybe destabilize it again like they did in 2020, or maybe in some other way. Maybe they would, I don't know, stage some sort of military provocation in order to create turmoil in Belarus, in a sense that they will be forced kind of to respond to such a provocation, but they wouldn't like to, and it all would just create a mess. Do you think that there's a possibility? And also, do you think there's a possibility that Putin will pressure, if there is any reason for that, or if there would be any reason for that, to actually send his troops somewhere, across the Belarusian and Ukrainian border?
Okay, so what Russia wants from Belarus right now is simply to be a platform, for the ability to launch air, missile, and if necessary, again, ground attacks from. They don't want Belarus troops, right? They don't want them. They're not tested in battle. They haven't been in a conflict since World War II, right? They would be more hindrance for anything more than large scale occupation, as holding territory than anything else, right? Russia is only using 10% of its own military and none of its own reserves. It doesn't need or want Belarusian troops, right? That is for the moment, right? Now, if some type of end game, right, with permanent occupation of say Kiev, well, then that's another story, but that is years probably down the road. Right. So all Russia wants from Belarus is a platform, and that's all they've got from it right now. And all of this was facilitated by the West's attempted fucking color revolution attempt in Belarus a couple years ago during the election. Without that, Belarus would not be as firmly on the Russian side as they are. It would be Lukashenko maneuvering as he has done best. Now he has no room for maneuver. He does what he's told, and he's that's it. That's the story. At the same time, I don't think there's any potential at the moment for any type of renewed color revolution coup
I don't
attempt,
think so either,
because he stamped down on it pretty hard in recent times, and he's got it proved that he had firm control of the military, the security services, the political elite. There was no break.
And
from
also
that
the kind of let's be honest, the dictatorship has strengthened in a sense. Like if you post something publicly, against Lukashenko or something, you're in trouble.
And what was made even more clear is there's actually very little pro-Western sentiment in the country. Polls done by Chatham House revealed that what's her name's support. It's Tikhanovskaya. Tikhanovskaya. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. That her actual support in the country was about 5 to 10%. All right. That there was support for other political forces in Belarus, but other than Lukashenko, but those were pro-Russian sources.
I know
so,
about that, which is again
Belarus,
something that people don't discuss, right? Like, it's a kind of.
But Chatham House polling revealed.
But also I think that after this colored revolution attempt in 2020, I think after the defeat of this uprising, whatever, like the kind of stage theater, the many of those that were genuinely pro-Western, they just left. And same thing in Russia. Yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted to refer to now is like, in Russia, after the sanctions have hit, like, or after they were enacted, because they've never really hit Russia badly. I mean, not yet, at least. But after this thing happened, then we've seen the most notably this symbolic, I think, picture of Chubais taking out money from an ATM in was it Ankara or Istanbul or somewhere in Turkey, flying to the West. So I guess, yeah, I think they've also, I mean, the West's failed attempt, you know, of regime changes in both of those countries, I think they've actually played into the hand of Putin and Lukashenko,
Yes,
because they were
absolutely.
able to purge basically the public opinion of their enemies. And, you know, I've heard how they were boasting about, particularly Putin and Lavrov and Peskov, how they were talking about, you know, the fifth column is now gone and all the rest of it, which is true.
At the beginning of this conflict, 100 to 150,000 people left Russia, right? Scared out by actually Western disinformation that Russia was about to institute a draft. Right? Which they're not even considering now, much less then, right? They left the country, and that was the liberal protest population, right? They're gone. Now, this is often referred to as a brain drain. The creative class. So these are the most intelligent, because only people who support the West are intelligent,
of course.
You know,
and
or
those
have
who,
skills, right?
Exactly.
So you see how much the Russian economy has collapsed since they left the country. The ruble is stronger than it was before the intervention. Manufacturing and industry are up, and which is shocking to me. And overall, the projected GDP drop for Russia, which at the start, by the Russian government's estimate, was going to be that Russian GDP would drop 23% this year. That has been revised again and again and again now. And the new numbers are the same ones that are discussed by the World Economic Forum. It's going to be between 2 and 4%.
Yeah, but I think the Russians are really, you know, astounded by their own performance.
Really. We are. I'm shocked. I was. My own family was preparing economic battle plans. What we do.
That's what we're doing in Poland in my family now, by the way. This is like how we're, you know,
how we might have to cut corners, you know, what happens if someone loses a job.
Exactly.
Unemployment is at record lows in Russia right now. We just threw all those out the window, right? I just bought a new computer, right? And I'm hardly I'm a middle class Russian lifestyle, because things are not bad here. Right.
But Mark, I got to ask this question, because this is also part of the recent picture here, recently developing picture, is Azerbaijan and Armenia. Because again, many speculations about it. And I'd like you to sort of give us the kind of expert interpretation, because to the extent that you have the information about it and all the rest of it, because, you know, it's difficult enough to get information about Russia, but it's even more difficult in Western Europe to get information about Central Asia. This is something almost impossible. So, you know, and there are, of course, media platforms, media outlets that are in Russian, you know, which are Armenian and Turkmeni, not Turkmeni, but Azerbaijani. And of course you can read them, but this is like, you know, I mean, this is like, I don't know. It's not something that I feel I can rely on. All right. So that's why I'd like you to perhaps tell me how do you read this? Like what's in it for Russia or for the West? Because many people, for example, speculate that this is another provocation by, you know, the CIA or whatever, in order to sort of destruct Russia, or, you know, all those things. I'm sure you came across, you know, those theories. So I'd like you to perhaps tell me what is your take, the kind of, you know, expert military take on this, and a geopolitical, if you like, of course.
We're talking Azerbaijan, which is von der Leyen's new reliable energy partner, right? Who will increase, double by 2027 gas supplies to Europe, increasing them from 6% to 10%. You know, anyway. And
it's a morally good gas, because Azerbaijan is a democracy, very liberal country, and doesn't invade anyone. So.
Wait a minute. No, they're not. Anyway. The opposite. Aliyev has his own little dictatorship down there. Since the ceasefire set in down there, the ceasefire that was brokered by Russia, Azerbaijan recovered all of their occupied territories, which, I mean, Armenia was stupid for not handing back after the conflicts of the 90s, as they saw Azerbaijaners' coffers and military grow with their energy supplies, and Armenia's own military shrink as their own economy shrank because of a landlocked country surrounded mostly by enemies. They were really stupid for not trading the occupied territories for some type of permanent peace deal with Nagorno-Karabakh, and they lost it. They lost all the occupied territories, and they lost even a portion of Nagorno-Karabakh, and they had to give up all kinds of concessions to Azerbaijan, including border delimitation favorable to Azerbaijan, and this transport corridor across the south of Armenia, linking the two parts of Azerbaijan together. Very politically unpopular in Armenia. It will also link Turkey with the Caspian, because Turkey's on the other side of Azerbaijan there. So very politically unpopular. Armenia has been dragging its heels on implementing the terms of this ceasefire because it's so politically unpopular. Azerbaijan knows this, and it is fully backed by Turkey, by Erdogan, who is doing his best of playing everyone against each other with two faces, playing all sides of everyone for every advantage for Turkey.
So you seem to agree with it, by the way. Sorry, because I also think that it's just Azerbaijan is just an extension of Turkey.
Yeah, I mean they're closely linked.
Yeah,
together.
I mean even the language is so similar. Yeah,
the political elites have common interests. Let's leave it at that. This is Erdogan. I don't think that this is some NATO plot. It may work out that way. The CIA may be happy to see the distraction, but I think this is entirely domestic. Turkey was already holding military drills just a week ago in Azerbaijan, obviously getting ready for this. I believe this is on their own internal timetable. They're simply taking advantage of an opportunity and a prevailing, however right or wrong, sentiment of Russian weakness, right? So the jackals are nipping at the corners here. And that's I think it's something that was on its own internal timetable, but maybe released just right now with sentiment, right? But
do you think
already,
it's making things significantly more complicated for Russia in any
No, not at the moment, right? I think Russia realizes that this is probably not the start of a major military operation to fully take Nagorno-Karabakh finally. I don't think that's what it is.
But that's going to happen eventually, right?
I think that Azerbaijan can get what they want economically and politically from Nagorno-Karabakh at this point, and that most of the Armenians will just leave Nagorno-Karabakh. I think that they want to, if they go in and ethnically cleanse Nagorno-Karabakh, they will permanently rupture relations with Europe, whom can't, however much they might like.
We're going to have to give up the Azerbaijani gas thing.
They have to. Yeah, they don't have any other gas opportunities. So, it's a tight spot for Europe there. But I do think that Aliyev is a smart, canny. He also doesn't want to permanently destroy relations with Russia. Azerbaijan is a strong trade partner of Russia. Russia has a good relationship. They sell weapons to Azerbaijan as well as Turkey, right?
Yeah, but they've also got good relations with the US, right?
Yeah, they do. Azerbaijan doesn't, their enemy is Armenia and Iran, and they don't have any other enemies. Whereas Iran in this is bizarrely, but that's the way it works out, is allied with Armenia because of the threat of the Azerbaijani ethnic population in northwestern Iran, right? So a lot of things play in there, but I think that this is Aliyev trying to push an Armenian government that is dragging its heels on implementing the terms of the ceasefire that they agreed to, particularly with transport corridor and another transport issue in the Lachin corridor that Armenia agreed to give up and then build a second, much less favorable road through the mountains to connect Armenia with Nagorno-Karabakh. And there's also the issue of border delimitation. There is still no firmly defined border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is feeling its strength. They're sensing opportunity, and they think that they can take a few more villages and settlements and get away with it. Right.
So nothing decisive is actually going to happen. What they're going to get some ground. They're going to get some maybe more
concessions, political concessions. Russia will twist Armenia's hand behind their back, saying we're not going to come in and help you here. So you know, give them this to keep them quiet. I think that's what Azerbaijan is doing right now. I mean, I could be very wrong, right? I'm not an
as the Russians say, поживем увидим. So, guys, I suggest we wrap it up here. I think it was a very great discussion and like full of, you know, insights and interesting, you know, interpretations and comments. Thank you, Mark, so much for, you know, your expertise and your thoughts and everything you've said. And thank you to our viewers and to our listeners. Thank you, Maria, for being with us. And to all of you out there, to the extent that you feel you can afford it, please go to our Patreon page or to our PayPal page and, you know, support us with either a monthly subscription or like a one-off donation. And don't forget to check out our website, thebarricade.online, and to subscribe to our Substack newsletter, thebarricade.substack.com.
You give these lefties your money because there's not many lefties left in Europe.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Mark, and see you in the next segment.